might ask, transition from what to what. And just as in the first panel, we looked at how Ukraine is at the crossroads between a choice between Europe and Russian integration, also at the crossroads in terms of deciding whether to cooperate more with the IMF or seek a new gas deal with Russia. Now, if we talk about the energy transition, again, there are a couple of angles to that. Ukraine is transiting away from a position of being reliant on Russian energy imports towards a more diverse supplier base. It's transiting away from being heavily reliant on natural gas in particular towards more diverse sources of energy. It's also transiting away from being a very inefficient and gas-guzzling economy towards being a more modern, energy-efficient country and one which uses more sustainable sources of energy. To discuss these themes this morning, unfortunately we don't have a representative of Shell, as was originally hoped. He had to pull out at the last moment, which is a shame given the great importance of shale gas and the recent Shell deal. But we do have with us someone else who has been looking very much at the shale gas question, Dr. Andrew Michter, who is the Senior Transatlantic Fellow and Director of the Warsaw Office of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. He holds honorary titles of Distinguished Professor and Senior Scholar in many different universities. And as well as energy, he's also frequently published on US and European security, NATO, transatlantic relations. In the middle, we have Sergei Maslichenko, who since 2007 has been at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, where he leads the bank's energy efficiency and renewable energy business development in Ukraine. That includes industrial energy efficiency and credit lines for sustainable energy. On my far left, your far right, Igor Burakovsky is Director of the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting, which is an independent economic think tank. He was previously project manager and senior economist at the East-West Institute's Kiev office. I should just say to the audience, we will be, as we did in the first panel, asking some questions of the audience in a few moments, so keep your voting handsets close by you. But I did want to just come back, first of all, to Igor Burakovsky. Clearly it makes sense to pursue better trade links, free trade links, in both directions, with both the European Union and the former Soviet republics. But it's been made pretty clear. President Kwasniewski said in the first panel this morning, I think Jose Manuel Barroso said it also this week after the summit, that Ukraine can't be a member of both of these blocs. It can't be a member of the EU and the customs union. So if it comes down to choosing, some might say, if you look at the customs union, given the strong economic links between Ukraine and former Soviet republics, perhaps there might be quicker synergy effects from restoring those historic links, reconnecting some of the old Soviet industries across borders, than actually going in the EU direction. Is there any substance at all to that argument? Are there sectors that would benefit from becoming a customs union member?
Well, from my point of view, even the issue, the discussion about restoring previously existing links is a very tricky question. First of all, we should take into account that actually, Ukraine as well as Russia as Belarus inherited a part of what was called All-National Economic Complex, and this particular complex was developed under Soviet times on the principles which are contrary to normal market system. So in this case, shortly after next day after the collapse of the former Soviet Union, these technological links were, so to speak, re-estimated in terms of real market, in terms of their real market value. That's why I think that actually we could talk about restoration of these links only in certain industries, and what could be restored from my point of view has been already restored. Restored in terms, for example, of Russian colleagues coming here, building vertical integrated enterprises, producing something which is consumed, for example, in Russia. And currently, I do not see actually any opportunities for further restoration of the links. We could talk about finding new opportunities, finding new schemes of cooperation, but from my point of view, well, definitely, if we start, well, reminding, well, this good American film about Star Wars, well, definitely in some cases, well, Empire Strikes Back in a way, and well, from my point of view, actually, this, you know, well, reminiscence of Soviet past, well, they're striking back. But, well, frankly speaking, I do not see a lot of potential, strictly speaking, about the restoration of previously existed technological and economic links, plus one more argument against, well, this technology is completely outdated. So that's why to restore something which is based upon outdated technologies. Thank you.
What about the option of remaining in the middle, not joining either of these blocks, or not doing the DCFTA with the European Union and not joining the customs union, but just carrying on in the middle, trying to improve relations with both sides, as Ukraine has been doing for the last 20 years? Is that still at all a sustainable option, or does Ukraine really now have to make the choice one way or the other?
Thank you very much for this particular question. If you remind, well, you could remind that, well, I started actually, my presentation from the part of the proverb saying, well, east or west, and for Ukraine, well, traditionally the whole proverb works, east or west, home is best, right? I would like to say that, well, from my point of view, politically and actually, well, economically, in some cases, it's much more comfortable for the current political elite to be in between. I think that actually playing all these, you know, well, difficult things and actually going either east or west will require certain institutional changes. So, well, as far as I understand, so to speak, psychological type of our leadership, well, for them is much more better, well, to be out of all these discussions, out of the processes, taking very difficult decisions, which needs them to be implemented. When it comes actually about the economic rationale, so definitely, well, we did a couple of calculations, and according to our rational, so to speak, arguments, it's really necessary, well, to move further, and to move further needs, well, to move towards a DCFTA with the European Union. Then, after a certain period of time, of course, actually we'll see what we get, what we didn't get, but at the same very moment we need to understand pretty well that, well, both arrangements, either customs union arrangement or DCFTA arrangement, well, is also, well, contains, well, certain level of uncertainty. So the benefits are not automatically guaranteed, so that's why we need, well, to do a lot of homework in order, well, to use the opportunities provided by the provided by the westward economic orientation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think at this point, before we move on to talk about more about energy efficiency and sustainable energy sources, I'd like to involve the audience and get your views on some of the topics that we're discussing. So if you could take your handsets again, as you did in the first session. I'm afraid once again the panelists don't have handsets, so we can't participate in this. But the first question to look at, we would like your views on, is the shale gas revolution may force Gazprom out of business, do you think? Number one, within 5 years. Number two, within 10 years. Number three, within 20 years. Or number four, never. And you have 20 seconds to cast your vote, starting now. Okay, well, fairly convincing answer to that one. More than two-thirds of you think that the shale gas revolution is never going to put Gazprom out of business. Although nearly a fifth do think that it could force Gazprom out of business within 20 years, which is interesting. It would be perhaps interesting to consider the question of whether the shale gas revolution may force Gazprom to break up rather than actually put it out of business. But that's not on my list, so I'm not going to pose that one to you now. The second question we would like to put to you is, do you believe, it's a very simple one, do you believe in peak oil theory? In other words, that oil production has peaked and that it's all downhill from here, with all the implications that that has. Simple answer, number one for yes, number two for no. Please vote now. Okay, well, interesting. 60-40 pretty much split in favor of no. Peak oil theory is not correct. I'm hearing some murmurs from the panelists to my left suggesting they don't agree with that, so they might want to come back to that question in a moment. But anyway, 60% of you don't believe in peak oil, or that we've reached peak oil, past peak oil. Okay, let's go on to the question 3. A bit of crystal ball gazing here, really. Where do you see the Urals oil price by the year end? Very important, of course, for Ukraine's economy and with a time lag for the gas price. Number 1, do you see it at the current level of about $110 a barrel? Number 2, above $110 a barrel, or number 3, below 110? Please make your choice now. Okay, so as time went on, we were converging a little bit more towards a three-way split. In fact, the lower price scenario just wins out with 40%, but 36% on the other hand believe it could be above $110 a barrel. A quarter of you think it will remain at the current level. So of course, below $110 a barrel would be very beneficial for Ukraine, easing the pressure on the gas price, easing the pressure on the current account deficit, might make it a little bit easier to muddle through and not take either of the key options on the table at the moment. Let's look at the fourth question now. What is your view on the following? From the standpoint of energy security, Ukraine should, number 1, maintain its gas transit capacity independently. Option 2, set up a joint venture with Gazprom. Number 3, focus on renewable energy resources. And number 4, continue to develop unconventional exploration. Please make your choices now. Okay, so for a fairly clear preference in favour of the final two options, continuing to develop unconventional exploration with the moves that we've seen recently in that direction, but also a focus on renewable energy sources, nearly 30% saying that's important for Ukraine's energy security. So that's perhaps a good point which I can bring into the conversation Sergei Maslichenko from the EBRD, who is a specialist in renewable energy and energy efficiency. Let me ask you first of all, Ukraine significantly reduced its imports of gas from Russia last year. But my understanding is at least part of the reason for that, or a fairly large part of the reason, was a switch by energy consumers to coal from gas. In terms of efficiency and environmental impact, is that actually a positive thing, or is it in fact a negative shift to be shifting from gas to coal as opposed to other sources?
Thank you. The main reason for decrease of natural gas consumption was higher price for natural gas, obviously. There was small increase in coal consumption, but it's quite marginal. And the main driver behind the consumption decrease was indeed gas price. And this is obvious for especially industrial sector, which saw dramatic drop in gas consumption for last 10 years. This is not the case for residential sector, for example, due to absence of any reforms and no price increase. There was no reduction in consumption, and this is a obvious argument for energy efficiency potential of Ukraine, and this is a area I also wanted to focus on in my presentation. In terms of coal impact, of course it's negative. Ukraine already has a quite large coal share in the primary energy supply basket, about 30%, which is well above European average, around 15%, and even US average around 20%. And the current energy strategy sees some increase even in coal production and consumption, but from environmental point of view, I think it's a negative trend, and from our point of view, the government should focus more on energy efficiency and renewable energy, which is downplayed in the current strategy. Just to give you some numbers, you probably know that Ukraine is 3 times energy inefficient than average European country like Poland, and even more energy inefficient than energy-rich Russia. Ukraine is the 4th largest natural gas consumer in Europe and 12th largest in the world. And I think this is a key driver for Ukraine's energy transition. It is a common knowledge that to produce 1 unit of energy is more expensive than to save the same unit. And especially in the country like Ukraine, where energy efficiency potential is enormous, and still a lot of low-hanging fruits around in energy efficiency. And the residential sector is a main player in this field. It has the greatest potential because it consumes, you just imagine, 18 billion cubic meters of natural gas plus indirectly around 6 BCM through heat supply. This is already 40% of Ukraine's natural gas consumption, which is more than whole industry consumes in the country. And this is a way we should look at, and the government should look at, because there is no need to, and it's more expensive to produce more natural gas and develop quite expensive projects when you can save energy cheaply with energy efficiency.
In the residential sector, though, I mean, how obviously raising prices would give an incentive, a very strong incentive, for people to consume more frugally and take energy efficiency measures themselves. But what else could the government be doing, or should the government be providing some kind of incentives, tax breaks for people to replace boilers at home? Are there things it could be doing in terms of the heating companies, the way heat is supplied to the residential sector? What other things could the government do to help that along?
In fact, we even estimated the potential for energy efficiency investments in residential sector, and it will cost around 20 billion euro, which is a lot. And based on experience in Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and other Eastern European countries, this may take up to 5-10 years to implement those measures. And this will also depend on price signals for energy consumers, funds availability, and the pricing of energy efficiency materials and equipment, and the knowledge transfer. Another very important issue which is always overlooked is Ukraine's huge potential in biomass. Significant amount of gas-fired heat production can be substituted by cheaper biomass-fired heat production. It is estimated that this may have an impact of between 8 and 10 billion cubic meters of natural gas. And this area is still untapped and overlooked by the government, first of all due to price distortion for population and district heating companies and the lack of the government policy in this area.
What about the industrial sector? I mean, you said that the biggest gains may perhaps be made in the residential, but certainly the perception from outside of Ukraine's industry is that it's still very energy inefficient. What could be done to stimulate efficiency measures within industry, and how much is there to go for in terms of reducing industrial energy consumption?
By the way, industrial sector is the main client of the EBRD. We invest 300-400 million euro every year in energy efficiency, and most of it goes to industrial sector. Why? The reason for that is a market price for natural gas, which all industrial companies have to pay, and they're all in private ownership, and responsive ownership. Owner will, of course, invest in energy efficiency. And this is what we saw. Industrial consumption dropped in 2.5 times recently just because of higher price for natural gas. And I think low-hanging fruits in industrial energy efficiency was already taken. A lot of small, medium, and large enterprises have been modernized, energy efficiency programs implemented, but unfortunately, due to the crisis, some of investment programs targeting energy efficiency was postponed or cancelled even, and part of the large inefficiency of industrial sector is also comes from Soviet history, because the structure of the industry in Ukraine is heavily dominated by heavy industry like metallurgical, chemical, which are very inefficient. And I think the only way to change it is just to stimulate structural changes in the country to increase the share of services and reduce share of heavy industry in the economy.
Okay, so it's about reorientating the
Yeah.
whole economy in a sense. Let's just talk briefly about sustainable, about renewable energy sources, because I understand that the EBRD is involved in projects concerning solar energy and wind energy in Ukraine. I mean, what is the outlook for those renewable sources? What kind of contribution could they make to Ukraine's energy needs, and over what sort of a time frame?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Renewable energy is still quite expensive, and Ukrainian feed-in tariffs are quite high. Also, they were decreased recently, especially for solar energy. We as a bank support this initiative. We help the government, and also last year we financed 3 projects, one solar, wind farm, and a small hydropower plant. And we are open to support more projects, including large projects and smaller projects, to create this renewable energy market in Ukraine. But the key here, as I said before, is the consumption of residential sector, and mostly heat consumption. And the greatest potential in this area is a biomass, which can be used for heat production. But unfortunately, this type of projects, they are all small because they relate to individual heat boilers, boilers at some villages, hospitals, etc. And there is no governmental policy, and there is no framework facility of any institution, including us, which can solve this issue. But as I said, I think this is the main area to focus for the government, and to reduce Ukraine's energy consumption.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring back in, if I may, Igor Burakovsky on the end there. Igor, I mean, we've heard of the various different approaches, increasing exploration for unconventional gas, energy efficiency measures, renewable energy. If you were advising the government, and you may already have done so, but if you were advising the government on the mix of policy measures it should be taking in terms of increasing Ukraine's energy security and reducing its reliance on Russian imports, what would you be saying to them? What should be the mix of policies, and how close are they to getting it right at the moment?
Well, advising to Ukrainian government is a very difficult thing, I would like to say, but nevertheless I will try to do it. Well, definitely I would start actually from the issues of taxation, take into account, well, the problems and, well, high risks, and, well, all these, exploration projects from my point of view are a kind of, well, venture projects. So let's be frank, we'll take into account what was said by Andrew, well, by Andrew about, well, it's, so to speak, well, research NATO. So I think that actually something should be done in terms of taxation. I'm not a big, actually, well, expert in terms of taxation, but definitely, actually, the fees for using, well, Ukrainian natural deposits, well, should be somehow well regulated. Plus, of course, well, certain tax breaks and certain privileges are to be granted to those who are going to be involved in this, well, long, multi-year projects. Point number two, well, definitely, actually, when we are talking about, well, the consumption side, well, I think that, well, we need actually finally to have a clear-cut idea of what's going on in the Ukrainian energy market. Actually, from one side, we are talking about the low tariffs for the communal services, for servicing the population, but at the same time, it's really difficult for me, even as an expert, to understand actually where the money are going on. So even if the population is paying, if the companies are paying, so well, but then actually, well, there is a problem with NAK Naftogaz, with some other companies, so maybe something is wrong in terms of the model of energy market, how it's working right now. And actually, well, point number three, well, definitely, well, I think that, well, for the government, the best way is to find certain type of public-private partnerships. I think that's something which could make the difference, but at the same time, actually, well, from my point of view, well, the government needs, well, to change somehow, actually, the perception of economic policy making currently. What I'm talking about, that definitely, well, Ukraine is already influenced by year 2015. I'm talking about presidential elections, and actually, well, in a way, I'm very much afraid that, so to speak, well, fiscal bias in Ukrainian economic policy, or better say, increasing revenue bias in Ukrainian policy, could hamper somehow, well, the strategic thinking in terms of promoting this type of economic activities.
Okay, let me ask another question, open this up to the panel, because I'm not sure who might be the best to answer this, but we're hearing a lot from the government in Ukraine about finding ways of importing gas from the European Union side, from reverse engineering the pipeline so that they can bring gas in from that side instead of from Russia. Okay, Andrew Michta might be able to speak on that. To what extent is this a realistic option? And also, is there not the danger that Ukraine will run into even more problems in terms of not taking the volumes in the take-or-pay clauses with Gazprom and finding itself hit with yet more fines for doing that?
Yeah, I will ask my Ukrainian colleagues to comment more on the specific Ukrainian issues, but again, in my experience working in the region, building the infrastructure, building the interconnectors that allow you to reverse the flow. The Poles are investing about 1,000 kilometers of pipe using the Polish gas. That's a system that they have in place by 2014, and then another 800 kilometers they're going to go in 2017. And they're linking to a number of countries. Lithuania. There's going to be a pipe going south as well. Why is this critical? It's critical because as the shale gas revolution proceeds, one of the added benefits is actually to build the grid that allows the Poles then to cycle in the event of a shortage or a crisis and rely on the suppliers coming from the outside. In our estimation, Germany has about the capacity of supplying about 30% of Polish needs in a crisis on a short term. So if you have the infrastructure in place, then you're a very different player. The question for the Ukrainian government is, can you invest in that kind of scale to begin with? What are the long-term consequences of this? The interesting thing, if you look even at Central Europe, is that a lot of the flow that you still have in place, I call it the Druzhba flow, that is the kind of pipeline that was laid out in the Soviet era that was to supply unidirectionally. Even Nord Stream, a new pipe, it's still running pretty much in the same direction, just happens to be running out of the Baltic Sea. So changing, if you look at the grid in Western Europe, it looks really like this in many ways. And you've got the ability to move gas in that way. To me, that's one of the essential potential gains that you will have in Central Europe even if shale delivers less than expected, being able to build an integrated delivery grid and the third package in the EU unbundling will make those countries that much more secure.
Anyone else want to add on that point? No? Let me just ask you then, you talked about the development of a spot, properly functioning spot market. I mean, what, in your view, are the chances of the spot market developing to such a point that it becomes the primary gas market in Central Europe, that it has sufficient volumes, sufficient liquidity, that it could become the price setter? And what are the chances of Ukraine becoming part of that market? It's something that Minister Stavitsky has talked about, using Ukraine's storage capacity to become part of this free-flowing Central European gas market.
I actually think everything depends on what those yields actually will be. When I talk to various representatives of the companies that are currently drilling in Poland, they're still at the phase of evaluating. They're getting some good results. I mean, as you know, Chevron is looking at Ukraine. Chevron is taking a broader perspective on the region, as I understand it. It's not just Poland. They're looking more broadly on Central and Eastern Europe, looking south as well. So depending on the volume of gas that can be produced, and not just in Poland, but unconventional in Europe more broadly, and that's really a political question. The British, for example, are in a very good position to start moving forward with the new discoveries. They have a better legal regime already in place. They're well set up to answer questions in the parliament, to deal with the media. The Poles are building that capacity right now. So the question to me is, first and foremost, what will be the volume? Will the commercialization of Central European shale deliver this game-changing quantity? And then, the sheer weight of that will be kind of falling into place. Or will it be something more modest that will become part of an energy mix in an individual country, and then these long-term contracts that you currently have will still probably dominate? That means what the European Parliament will also be doing. I've watched very closely the two studies that they recently did. They did the environmental impact study and the macroeconomic study, and the amount of the kind of tug of war that you see over there, quite frankly, the amount of lobbying, if I may be so blunt, from various players, has slowed down the process and created a perception that maybe our initial expectations about shale gas were not what they're going to be. Let me just add one more point about this peak oil question. We've got in the States about 1,750 square meters of shale oil deposits, okay? If you look at the volume of that, and that's thanks to one congressional act of 1910, when the so-called Pickett Act, when the U.S. Congress set aside lands both in California and in the central United States to basically supply the U.S. Navy with oil. So we've got vast access to land that would be available for shale exploration. 5 times the capacity of Saudi Arabia, quite frankly. Now, the question is, why haven't we been using this? Well, the answer was technology. We now have new in-situ thermal technology coming online that will make that shale oil recoverable, okay? Rand Corporation put out a study about 6 or 7 months ago, if I remember correctly, arguing that U.S. shale oil can actually be produced, commercially produced, and competitive in terms of price, even at a price point of $40 a barrel. I mean, that's staggering. So if you look at the U.S. deposits alone, Australia, it's to me, and again, I may sound a little breathless when I talk about the technology of it all, but I remember the peak oil and Matt Simmons debates, how we were all running out, we're all going to die, and oil at 200, 300, 400, 500. Technological innovation and fracking changed all of that. And technological innovation and in-situ thermal operations is changing this on the oil side. And I always say to people, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It ended because of technological change. So I would put my money on these new resources that are coming on. And if the shale gas in Europe is really leveraged, if it is produced in the capacity that I think is there, meaning Bulgaria should come back. Bulgaria has a ban on fracking right now. France needs to come back. It's not just a Central European issue. Then you're looking at a very different structure.
Okay, thank you very much. We have just a couple of minutes left, so if there are any questions from the audience to the panel, we can take one or two. Before I take those, just let me remind you, if I may, those people who have booked one-on-one meetings this afternoon, please do check the schedule with the desk outside, just in case there have been any changes. You can do that straight after this panel ends. I did see a hand go up, so if we could get a microphone to that gentleman there. Yes. Okay, if you could introduce yourself to the audience as well, please. Thank you.
Yes, hello, my name is Joakim Edlund. So my question is, when you say that this new technology might be a game changer for Ukraine, what is then the different scenarios when it comes to the time frame?
I'm not sure I understood the question. What is the difference in...
You mean how long is it going to take
How long is it going to take?
To develop these under different scenarios, perhaps? Yeah.
That is a terrific question, because it really requires a commitment on the part of the Ukrainian government to move forward, quite frankly. The Polish shale gas revolution, as I understand it, I've started watching it from its inception, was actually driven by what I call entrepreneurs. I mean, the government lined up behind it, but rather than having the Ministry of the Economy drive the process, it was the MFA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, largely the vision of Minister Radek Sikorski of kind of trying to bring attention to this tremendous change that was underway. So a lot depends on what decisions the Ukrainian government will make on licensing. Right now you have two players, I believe. You have Shell and you've got Chevron. Kind of Shell is here, Chevron is dipping its toe. The Poles did kind of massive effort to get a lot of small operators and the majors to come in. So one would be, how do you go about issuing licenses? How do you actually put the message out? And what is the regulatory regime you're going to put in place to entice these companies to come? Remember one thing, in all the major energy companies, like one of the reasons Exxon left, I said it was shale, it was kind of assessment of the prospects, it was the regulatory issues. But in all of these companies, there's the never-ending competition for capital, internal, between different operations. So also don't assume that because you've got a major company invest, and they've put in some investment to develop this, if you don't continue creating a favorable climate, that they're going to continue to stay simply because they're already there. It may be that prospects in Latin America or prospects somewhere else will all of a sudden look better. So create an environment in which these companies would want to come in and do it. We talked a lot about public response. There's a lot of disinformation about fracking, in my view, out there. I am not being Pollyannish. Every technology has an opportunity cost. There are risks to everything we do. That's not my point. My point is that if people see, movies about faucets burning because gas is leaking and all these kinds of things, bad science quite often, really bad science, or stories about water contamination that actually occurred not because of fracking, but because the regular drill going down was not properly sealed. All of this creates unease and uncertainty. And Europe is not like the United States in terms of space relationships. We've got more tightly packed communities, especially in Central Europe and in the West, and that immediately reverberates. Next thing is infrastructure planning. I mean, I look at what the Poles are now in the process of massive infrastructure modernization. If you travel through Poland today, you see the highways are being built, networks are being upgraded and all of that. All of these elements factor into cost-benefit assessments for companies that want to invest, in exploration. And you're looking kind of how you're going to position yourself. Will you be able to get the heavy equipment to the sites? What is the infrastructure in place? What is the environment? I'm a great fan of Teddy Roosevelt as one of the most successful American presidents. And he always had a philosophy of using the government to pry open markets, create favorable conditions for business to invest, and then let business compete. And I think if you come in with that philosophy to energy development, because look, China arguably has probably the largest shale gas deposits out there. And the Chinese will do it. I'm sure the Russians will do shale gas as well. even though it seems like, they are learning the technology. The technology is no great mystery. The chemicals and the suppliers are pretty much coming in from a certain subset. So this is no great, great kind of mystery. It takes money, it takes data sets, and it takes patience. But I am convinced that everybody will get into the unconventional game. And then how do you write your geological regulations? Case in point, will you say that a company that takes a concession here can only go down to a certain depth and they have to stop and do another environmental impact study? Or will you tell them that they have to go to the minimum depth of a certain number so that they explore your geology for you? There's a lot Ukraine can learn by talking to the Poles and learning from how they did their own, overall, I would argue, very successful shale gas effort.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So still a lot of unanswered questions, uncertainties about shale gas development, but a lot of promise too. Our time, I think, has run out, so it remains for me to thank very much indeed our panelists, Andrew Michta, Sergei Maslichenko, and Igor Barakovsky. Thank you very much indeed.